record to the cloud. We've started. Okie dokie. Well, first thing I want to say is welcome to AEESP Sense of Community, Educating in a Virtual World. I'm Joel Ducoste, and from NC State and president-elect of this great organization. And my co-moderator is Dr. Colleen Naughton from UC Merced, and the initiator of building a sense of community given this virtual world that we are functioning in at the moment. I can tell you it is important that we continue to support the work that we do to educate our students, support our colleagues, and mentor our graduate students in postdoctoral research. These actions can never stop. So with some ground rules to make this experience go as pleasantly as possible, I would ask everybody to mute their microphone if you're not speaking. Use the raise hand feature so either myself or Colleen could acknowledge you if you're ready to ask a question. We will also be monitoring for live questions that may have been submitted via chat. And we have submitted questions. I know you have submitted questions earlier that we will pull from to ask our panelists. So we'll do that as well. If you could, just to reduce some of the bandwidth, please go ahead and maybe turn off your video feature, except for the panelists. We'd like to see you all, just to make it a little easier. I know internet stuff can go awry, as I've happened to me many times. Okay, so the AEESP Sense of Community series goals, we have polled many of our members to provide guidance on what important topics that you would like us to focus on. And we will be working with the AEESP Education Committee to help deliver those topics. I truly want to thank my co-host Colleen for reaching out to our AEESP community with that initial email way back in March. It seems so long ago, but it was back in March when we entered this arena, and to develop and collecting supporting material for our members to maintain that high quality education, even in this virtual world. So with that, I want to introduce our distinguished panelists. First, let me introduce Dr. Belinda Sturm. She is a professor in the Department of Civil, Environmental, and Architectural Engineering at the University of Kansas. She also serves as an Associate Vice Chancellor for Research. Belinda currently serves as Vice Chair of the Water Environment Federation Municipal Design Symposium and as Chair of the International Water Association's USA National Committee Executive Board. Welcome, Belinda. Next, we have Dr. Maya Trotz. She is a professor of civil and environmental engineering at the University of South Florida. Her students are currently investigating reef and marine inspired land-based solutions that include water sector resilience, green infrastructure for stormwater management and resource recovery for municipal and on-site wastewater in Tampa, Belize, and Barbados. She currently directs Strong Coasts, a collaborative national research traineeship program with the University of Virgin Islands, to foster systems thinking related to food, energy, and water solutions with coastal community partners. She is a past president of AEESP and my mentor, and sits on the board of Fragments of Hope Corps, an NGO committed to coral restoration in Belize. Welcome, Maya. Next on our panelist is Dr. Trish Gallagher, excuse me. She is a professor of civil, architectural, and environmental engineering at Drexel University. She has implemented evidence-based teaching methods in her engineering, geology, and sustainability courses, including a flipped learning environment and project and place-based learning. In February, she organized a teaching strategies and resource workshop for geotechnical engineering faculty in Minneapolis, Minnesota. She has presented pedagogical happy hour for Drexel Center for Advancing STEM Teaching and Learning Excellence. And by the way, I need to figure out how to do a really good happy hour by Zoom. So looking for advice. and was featured as Castle Highlights. Welcome, Trish. All right, and last but not least, Dr. Dan Oerther. He is a science diplomat, social entrepreneur, and professor of environmental health engineering at Missouri University of Science and Technology in Rolla. Dan's convergent research integrates engineering and nursing to solve challenges of poverty, including food security and access to water, sanitation, and hygiene. He uses blended flipped mastery learning to teach public health, environmental modeling, science diplomacy, environmental design, and environmental biotechnology. Dan is a fellow of the American Academy of Nursing, the National League of Nursing, the Royal Society of Public Health, and Chartered Institute of Environmental Health and Society of Operations Engineering, and AEESP. He is the president-elect of the American Academy of Environmental Engineers and Scientists, and previously served on the board of AEESP. Welcome, Dan. And thank you all for your participation on this important topic of educating in a virtual world. Let's begin by giving each of our panelists some opening remarks to start things off. Let's start off with Belinda. Hi, Belinda.
Hi. Well, thank you again for the invitation. I just have a few things that I'll mention about my activity in the online teaching space. In 2014, so it's been 7 years now, I originally flipped my class. This was part of a big initiative at the University of Kansas where we physically reconfigured our classrooms to be round tables and not lecture style classes. We got a lot of ideas from NC State and their scale up model, just to give a plug to your school, Joel. In that effort, I recorded in my intro to environmental engineering class, I originally recorded 2 long of lectures. They were 20 to 30 minutes. And over the course of 2 or 3 years, I cut those down to be 15-minute lectures, 1 for each class. And I put those up on YouTube. And to this day, I always joke, I've never had so many teaching evaluations because everyone's always finding my mistakes in my lectures and commenting on them. So it takes a little humility to put yourself out there on YouTube. My 10-year-old doesn't think so, but it does for professors. The fortunate thing about that effort that I invested in was when COVID happened and we had to quickly shift to online in March, I essentially didn't have to create online materials for that course. I chose, and I was teaching a 67-person class this spring, an intro to environmental engineering. I chose to do synchronous class time and have them watch the videos before. And I still attempted to do my active learning activities during the Zoom synchronous time. I learned quickly how to use breakout rooms. And in my course evaluation, the students really, I think they felt very disconnected from each other, having that rapid transition. They commented that they really appreciated those smaller breakout rooms and being able to do the activities. I used Google Docs a lot so they could work collaboratively in those breakout rooms. And I used a lot of internet searching of EPA databases, which we do in the course anyway, with IRIS and 303D list and AIR reports. So that was all very good. I think today what I'm looking forward to learning from our panel and from the community is some of the challenges was wanting to provide equitable access. So I recorded the synchronous times and made those available, but my attendance did drop off. And I didn't count off for that because I wanted to be accommodating to people's access challenges. But there's a balance between equity and accountability, and any advice on how to make sure that we're not favoring students who may have challenges on access, I'd look forward to learning about. I will also say, as chair of the IWA USync, I'm participating in discussions with AEESP and the E3 community of IWA, and we're interested in making our online resources have international design components. And so we'll be looking forward to learning and discussing how to do that. So that's what I've got. Thank you.
Appreciate it, Melinda. Maya, please.
Thank you, everyone, for being here. I just wanted to acknowledge, I see the AESP President, Karl Linden, is online. So hello, Karl, and so many other members of the board. And again, thanks for Colleen and Joe for organizing this. I would say that since, I think it started in graduate school, my advisor, Dr. Leckie, is retiring this year. And I bring this up because I used to teach the lab class at Stanford with him. And he convinced me, or I convinced him to buy me a video camera and record the labs. This is back in 99, 2000. And he was saying, you know, jokingly that we should get James Earl Jones to sort of do the audio over it. My car was broken into and I lost all of the computer, hard drive, everything, and never really completed the videos for that. But when I started teaching the lab at USF, we started to record some of the videos just to show students before they come in what the lab might look like. My colleague, Dr. Zhang, converted the lectures to also shorter materials, you know, videos that would go online. So the students would sort of look at this before they came into the lab. So I had those things to rely on as I was teaching in the lab last semester when COVID happened. And then there was a component where, you know, we went online in March and we were done by April. And it was for some, you know, more fluids labs. And I didn't have recordings of the actual lab. The week before spring break, I asked the students if they wanted to come in. They still, you know, school was still open, or if they preferred me to record myself doing the lab and I would share the video. I myself was scared to be in school, so I kind of rushed through it, but showed them, you know, okay, here's me taking a measurement here and stuff like that. So they had some visual of what the experiment would look like. I didn't go on for, you know, 40 minutes doing the experiment. I cut it short and then shared data from a previous year. And then for the sessions where I'd normally have a meeting with them on Monday from 5 to 7:45 is what's on the books. And we normally, because it's 3 big classes linked together. And I found students were really interested in speaking about COVID-19. So I also assigned a group project on COVID-19. And I came up with a web page with all the different ways in which environmental engineering interfaces with COVID-19, whether it was air, wastewater, all these things. Many of them focused on masks. And I bought all sorts of things for them to make hand sanitizers, for them to do all sorts of experiments, thinking that I would be able to mail these out for them to do that inquiry on their own. And realized soon after that we were facing, many of them were just struggling, not struggling, but really trying to keep up with classes and dealing with this COVID-19 world. And I remember coming off of the calls at 8 p.m., much longer than the class would have gone for, and having a lot more engagement from them in that period, and just being very, a little exhausted, but also thankful that we had a space to at least share and discuss, because we were all learning. It was a crash course. And I see Laura, the editor of our newspaper, on here, and I asked her a few months ago how she was doing, and she said, you know, well, my students and I, you know, we went really hard when this started and we researched everything. And so now it's sort of just kind of taken a step back. And I feel that that's what that class allowed me to do. I did interviews with, well, surveys with them afterwards, asking sort of, you know, what did they get out of this? Are they going to be wearing masks? I mean, we're in Florida right now. People are against wearing masks. You know, I still send them messages. I was like, I hope this is none of you, right? And so, and I did encounter issues where some were on the phone, student was in the Bahamas, didn't have good internet connections. And so just being cognizant of that, I must say I totally forgot to record every Monday. I forgot to record it. I said I would record and post and then completely forgot. But in terms of the materials that they needed, say, to do their lab experiments, those were recorded and placed online. And And I know Susan Maxton is also on, and she had a student who did an honors project on the mask making. And, you know, we were sharing emails in the student projects. And I just feel that, to me, for my, it was the right thing for me to do at the time.
Great. Well, thank you, Maya. Appreciate that. Trish?
Hi, everyone. Thank you for the invitation to be on this panel. I'm also very excited to be here and really looking forward to the conversation. I teach at Drexel University, which is on quarters, and so my entire quarter was moved online. So I had to move my 4-credit geology class, Geology for Engineers, online. I also, like Belinda, teach in a mostly flipped format, so I already had a lot of content that was online, but I do a short lecture at the beginning of class, so I recorded all of those and posted them. And when I did that, I also created think, pair, share questions, and I asked them to prepare answers before they would come to class. And I had a class of 48 students. So then when we got into class, I would put students into breakout rooms to talk about those think, pair, share questions, and they would be there for 5 or 10 minutes, and then we would come back to the main room. And students were reluctant typically to volunteer answers. And so I tried for a while, and then after 2 or 3 weeks, I would just answer those questions. Those questions would later show up in some form on the exams, so that during the exams, I made them open book and open note, and I used a combination of multiple choice and short answer questions. And so that was how I sort of sorted out the people who were really putting in a lot of time and really engaged from those who were really just taking it to fill a requirement, because it is a required course for everyone in my department. So I had a lot of activities that were already developed. And so we did those in small breakout rooms. And I think I had to develop 5 or 6 new activities, and I had to convert my rock and mineral identification labs and my topographic maps to online. So honestly, it was a really challenging quarter for me. And I live in a household with 2 adults and 1 very noisy cat who you may see at some point during this call. So some of the things that I had already done that were part of the class, I was still able to do. So I have a field trip, and previously I had recorded that and put it on a YouTube channel. And so the students could still do the field trip. If they were in the Philadelphia area, they could actually go and do it. But if they were somewhere else, they could do a virtual field trip. And I also have self-guided field exploration. So students would have to go out into their neighborhood and take pictures of features, geologic features, or somehow the built environment interacting with the natural environment. So those were ways that I used to engage students in the class. Similar to Belinda, they seem to appreciate the breakout rooms and getting to know each other. I also asked students to record a voice thread introduction so that they could get to know each other and I could get to know them a little bit. And some of my observations were that it really was a ton of work to do in a short time, even though much of my class was already online. Some of the students were very highly engaged and some didn't come to a single class. It was a challenge for me to do the new prep as well as keep up with all the grading because it's an active class, and so there's a lot of grading that goes on. And one thing that was sort of difficult for me to get kind of engaged when I went to class is that I would just be looking at all these black screens with names. And so I often felt like I was just talking to myself, and some people would use their video, and so it was a little easier to see like if somebody was looking confused or would nod. But I did feel a lot like I was just talking to myself. And I really missed getting to know the students personally. This is a really interactive class, and during activities, I walk around and I get to know students and what they care about. And so I feel like I know them a little bit, and that was much harder to accomplish. So sometimes I would invite them to stay after class, and I would go into their breakout room and talk to them. But I found that hard. And sometimes to just get myself psyched for class, I love teaching, but sometimes to just get myself psyched up to go to class and face all this blank screen and talk to myself was a little bit of a challenge. Then another thing is that classes usually went longer because students would stay in class. They didn't have that constraint of having to leave to go to another class. So they would just stay on Zoom in their breakout rooms until they finished their activities. So very often my hour and 20-minute class went 2 hours, and my 2-hour class would go 3 hours. So I was happy to do it. I was grateful to give them a place where they could talk to each other and interact a little bit, because they really struggled, right? Like for me, quarantine was not hard because I live in a house where it's quiet and we have enough space and I can go outside and walk, I'm safe. But for some students, it was really tough. Just like for many faculty, it was really tough. Like, how do you find a quiet, one of my students, and I think I'm talking too long, but one of my students would go to class in the garage, and he was grateful that he and his family had built this garage because he was living with 10 people and it was the only quiet place he had to go. Another student sent me a video where he and all of his family were standing outside their grocery store protecting it from the looters. And so it was really just a really tough time for a lot of people, a lot of professors, a lot of students. And so I think I talked too long and I will stop, but for some of my experiences.
Appreciate that, Trish. Thanks for sharing. Dan?
All right, so the last but not least. So I'm going to ask everybody if you would do just one quick thing for me. If you haven't, just kind of scroll through and look at all the people that are online, the 79 folks that we have as part of this Zoom, and think about engineering faculty and think about the engineering profession, and just look at what we've got on here and realize an important thing. There is no other discipline within engineering that looks like what this Zoom chat looks like. So when we're talking, educating our students, there are no other engineering classrooms that look the way our classrooms look. In terms of, in terms of gender parity, we're doing fantastic. In terms of other kinds of diversity inclusions, we could continue to do better. And so I'm not going to downplay the role of pipeline. I'm not going to get into discussions of role models. But here's what I want us to, I'm going to kind of riff a little bit off what Trish was leading into. We have a lot of discussion about how to educate heads. And we have a lot of discussion about how to have online labs so we can educate hands. What makes environmental engineering and science so special is our hearts. It's that fact that we care deeply about others over ourselves. And we are such a group that loves to interact with others, that loves to care for others, that loves to care for the environment, that we've got to remember, I think it's vital that we remember our students are desperate for that kind of caring interaction. That's who they are. So it's not just about what we know or what we can do, it's also deep about who we are. And so Zoom fatigue, the idea that you're struggling with being online, as Trish was saying, pouring yourself out to a webcam and getting no response back. If you do that for 50 minutes and you've got 2 or 3 classes in a day, you're gonna be totally wiped out. And it's fine to feel that way. And we need to support each other in feeling that way. When we look across this, panel of folks that are a part of this meeting, the responsibilities for caring for others, both, in our own home in terms of whether it's children or spouses or elderly relatives or neighbors, this is a caring group. And so for those of us that are in some leadership positions, having broad shoulders to protect those of us that have lots of responsibilities we're trying to balance. I'm sure many of you saw in chat, This is real time. My kids just came up and said, hey, Dad, the dog just puked on the couch. And I'm like, oh, okay, great. Yeah, I will sit here and continue to focus on this Zoom meeting. And so what I'm trying to point out is that I think there's a tremendous opportunity, and I have found great reward from perhaps moving away from some of the emphasis on information and getting into knowledge and understanding. And that involves giving students opportunities for much more reflection, much more internalizing and judging the information that comes in. It's not going to work well for every class, right? I mean, you know, some of our quote unquote kind of basic, you know, how do you teach calculus with empathy? That's pretty difficult, right? But how do you teach intro to environmental engineering with empathy? Whether you want to bring in the issues of social justice, whether you want to bring in some, I mean, there's a tremendous amounts of stuff that you can bring in that can engage students and grow their heart in addition to their hands and their minds. So if you've never Googled the term STEMpathy, the idea of adding STEM plus emotional intelligence or empathy, Google the term STEMpathy and look for ways to bring STEMpathy into your classroom. And so that would be what I would encourage you to take away from this, is look for ways to grow our students and our own hearts. And I'm going to be quiet now. Thanks, Joel. Thanks to all the panelists. This is awesome to be here.
Thanks, Dan, for those comments. All right, so lots of issues, and there were lots of questions that were asked for our participants through RSVP. But I'm going to throw out one that's probably a tough one, I think. Dealing with this technology and having all of these, you know, internet access and stuff. Does anyone have challenges that maybe certain students may not have adequate access? And what kinds of things are universities doing to try to help facilitate with that we might be able to share so that, you know, those that don't have access somehow are able to still achieve the learning that we're hoping that they would achieve? Anybody, panelists, want to?
Well, so I'll just start. So we're in rural Missouri. So I had one student that drove an hour to sit in a McDonald's to be able to have internet access. So that was her normal situation. And so practically speaking, you know, recording a Zoom video and having it live stream and all that, that's neat if you're in some place that has internet access. But ripping the MP3 audio off so that they can download that separately and still putting up a low res PDF deck of your slides so that they can look at that and go along with the MP3. So I'll just quickly share that. Think about ways to, you know, to reduce the bandwidth requirements of your material and increase that people can do it in batches as opposed to live.
Okay, that sounds good. Anybody else have ideas to help with that?
So our IT group invested in some hotspots, and I know they deployed those to a certain number of students. I'm hoping that they do more of that this fall if needed. And I thought that was a great initiative on their part.
Cool. Anybody else? All right.
For me, I'm in Philadelphia, and I did have some students who had poor internet connection. And one of the ways I dealt with it was to just make sure that they knew that they could complete the materials individually. And, you know, they didn't have to show up to class. And most of the materials were already there and could be downloaded. But Dan, you have some great points.
Okay. Cool. All right. Let's throw out another question here. So engagement. I mean, this is always a question of making sure that students are not tapped out during these kinds of things. So what are some creative ways that you all are doing to try to keep students engaged during and minimize Zoom fatigue, given what Dan had said earlier, that it does happen?
I could say that, well, our class has finished since April. And for our NRT, our Strong Coast program, our research specialist, Heather Hopkins, has sort of brought some new ways in which we could use Zoom. And I think Colleen could even discuss some of the things that she does in her class, but a lot more active engagement. And this would only work if there's a synchronous group. And I think also if it's a smaller course, it's hard to do if you have an undergraduate class of 60 or so. But there are lots of tools that you could use on Zoom. And there's, if you just Google activities for, you know, teaching with Zoom, you find a lot of neat little things that you could get people to stand up, you know, sort of bring things, advise them ahead of time to bring something that they have to share. Lots of different puzzles and games. There's the annotate. You can annotate from the screen, so I can, you know, mark, you can put an image or something up and we could all mark it. So like little things to just break up the monotony of a session, I think are great. And those I learned after the semester, but hopefully, you know, if we do this going into the fall, I'll be able to do some of that.
Great.
I think this year was the first year that my students commented that they liked writing the current event papers. I usually do 3 or 4 of these during the semester, and usually my engineering students don't like the writing assignments, but this year I think the discussion of current events, you know, the COVID map that was going around about air emissions globally as shutdowns happened, I brought that into the class when I was doing air pollution control. Just any sort of way to connect them with current events, they appreciate it. In the outside world, they really appreciated that.
Excellent. Okay. Neat. All right.
Well, Joel, just one quick one. I had raised my virtual hand. See, you know, that's the problem when you got 100 people to watch. You can't see all those virtual hands. So I would encourage folks to also remember that we need to do all the online and all the face-to-face starting in just 3 weeks, because we are going to have students who have reasons to not be in our classroom. And so, you know, I've pounded at my own institution. We've had this like butts in the seats mindset, and I am like, absolutely not. We cannot start, you know, we as environmental engineers and scientists need to start from a precautionary principle. We need to start from a vulnerable population standpoint. So we should all be centered in on how do we protect our vulnerable populations and move forward from there. So I refuse to start from, I'm going to be in the classroom. I start from, I'm going to be online, and then I'm going to make myself now more accessible in the classroom. And I would encourage us as a profession to be in that space, because that's who we are. We protect the vulnerable, and then we move into the normal space. And I think our teaching needs to follow a same kind of approach. We should not marginalize the 5% of folks that have some reason to not be in the classroom. We should start there and then come to the others. My opinion.
All right. Some other tough ones, at least for me, I know, you know, I've taught a capstone design course, and, you know, that's all about interaction. That's all about getting into groups and acting as mini consulting firms to solve their particular problem. So what kinds of things, because I struggle with Zoom and the technology or any other format, what kinds of things that you all are doing to try to facilitate easier interaction for these kinds of courses? What would you recommend?
Text.
Texting? Yeah. I mean, because I know we can do this breakout, the breakout rooms activities, I know we can assign them at the very beginning, but there are a lot of people, at least in my class, when I did it, there would be guest speakers who would want to jump from room to room, well, group to group, to offer advice and all of those kinds of things. And some of these technologies don't allow that to happen as easy as it could. And I, you know, just trying to see if you all have some roundabout tricks. And I see a raised hand from Susan that, Matson, do you have a suggestion?
One of the things that I did in the spring, and it was, I didn't anticipate continuing it for the semester, but when we first went online, I actually went online early because I'm asthmatic. So luckily I didn't have the 2-hour notice that we were at 10 o'clock, that we were going online at 12. So my students got a chance to prepare ahead of time. But I normally do participation questions in class. So how do I continue that online? So what I did was every week I would assign a participation question. The first one was just, what can I, as your instructor and as associate chair for undergraduate studies, do to help you navigate this uncertain time? And I always gave them a chance that if they didn't want to answer that, they could just tell me anything. Tell me what color of the day, their favorite color or whatever. And I continued that throughout the semester. I used one of Dan's questions because a group of us were communicating on Twitter. But again, it gave me a chance to connect with students. They were not necessarily related to course material. Some cases they were, sometimes not, most often not. And I read every one of them, and it took a lot of time. And I tried to respond at least a little bit to each and every one of them. But that also meant that I could keep connected to students. They could do it at their convenience. So if they couldn't, for whatever reason, be on class when I was lecturing, but I was recording. But if they couldn't be in class at the regular time, they could still participate, they could still respond. And I got a sense of when students were struggling. I got a sense of, in some cases did respond to students, here's where you can go and get some help. And I think that was critical. And I think we're still going to see that in the fall. There's still students struggling with all sorts of issues. So I think finding ways, both synchronously and asynchronously, to keep connected with students is really critical. And I actually got to connect to, I think in some ways, connect to students that probably I wouldn't have seen because they wouldn't have come to office hours. Maybe they were quiet in class. But I got to learn about Mongolian breakfasts and all sorts of cool stuff. So anyway, that's what I did.
Okay. Thanks, Susan. All right, let's, Dan, or Trish, I'm sorry.
A lot of students at Drexel use Microsoft Teams, and even in my geology class, they would come to the breakout room, come to class for the early part, and then they would just go offline and had their own Microsoft Teams set up. And some of my colleagues have very successfully done like project-based learning courses using Microsoft Teams. And I don't know it well enough to tell you how they did it, but a lot of people are very happy using that.
Okay.
I was going to say, I did also a lot of discussion board because I needed to be asynchronous in my interaction as well, because I had 150 students in the spring. So that was a lot to, if I was going to try to wander around Zoom breakout rooms, I couldn't possibly have done it. So I found discussion board a great way, because then I could, whenever I had some free time, no matter where I was, I could hop on and read and comment on discussion boards. So.
Great. Anyone else? Let's go out to the attendees and see if they have any questions. Anybody have a live question that they want to ask our panelists for discussion?
Can you use raise hand, or Jim, I think, had one in the quick chat, but he can maybe voice it.
I see a raised hand by Paul. Go ahead, Paul.
Again, most of us are going to be teaching some type of, asynchronous thing this fall. There's some great, many people here have made some great YouTube videos. Does AEESP have a summary somewhere of recorded things? So like Belinda, I went to looked at yours, but I'm just wondering if AEESP has a library of them anywhere.
Well, I believe there was early on this call out to collect a lot of information, Paul. It was put in, I think it was like a spreadsheet-like collection that showed a lot of links and things like that. And I'm hoping that we can still build things related to that in support of this new format that we have to deal with, and maybe integrating even from here until the foreseeable future as a hybrid mix of face-to-face and online teaching. So I'm hoping that we can continue to develop that, and we're in the process of trying to update our website so that it might be a little bit easier to grab a hold of that information on our website. The current website configuration is old, and we recognize that, and we're in the process of updating that in the future. So,
and Joel, I'll just mention part of the discussions that USync is having with Karl and AEESP and IWAE3 is discussing how we might find a permanent home for that library that may also include some peer review, because I know a lot of times I'll go out and I'll search for a factory tour or a supplemental aspect of a lecture, but having other professors who are experts in that area to review them ahead of time, I think would be great resources. So we're exploring ways to do that, maybe workshops that can be held in conjunction with some of our conferences. So hopefully those discussions will continue. And Nancy Love is participating. She's really been an organizer of some of those conversations.
I would add that a few years ago, we'd been talking to WEF about doing that during WEF Tech on the floor. I was trying to encourage the students who are attending, they do the tour and the guided tours, that they would have professional recordings done, and they wanted the company themselves, to make the recording. I think when they tried to do it on the guided tour, they said it was a little too loud. So the videos they made weren't great, but I do think, because you're capturing so much of the industry just on that floor, and then something like that could then sort of, faculty could then do the vetting or peer review, sort of saying, well, this is where it might fit and so on. But I do think getting that information is great. I'd also say, I see folks posting the list, Colleen and showing the list to resources online. And the AESP website, YouTube channel, to go to what Paul is saying, what we could do is put a playlist of the videos according to, like, here's, air pollution or, wastewater or water, or just all the videos. But that could be done so that you could just go to the AESP YouTube channel also.
Maya, I was going to type it, but in the WEFTech program committee, we have fundamentals sessions now, and we're attempting to record those this year to create documents. So perhaps that idea originally came from you. Thank you.
I doubt.
It's a great idea.
Perfect. Any other questions? I think, Karl, did you have something you wanted to share, or?
No, just that I had posted in the chat the link to the AEESP. We actually mined all the Twitter posts and comments and resources that were coming out quite rapidly. A lot of that spurred on by some of Colleen's initial work, but there's a lot of good resources out there. So we put it together on a page on the AEESP website. We also have a lot of kind of historic materials on the website that's in the members only area as course materials, and you can like links to get lecture slide decks and things like that, and also directly contact some of the folks who posted those and get their updated materials. Everyone's willing to share things, but I feel like there's so much out there right now. We're almost overwhelmed with content. We definitely need to rethink about how we organize the material and make it available, maybe on kind of a course basis, or as Maya was saying, maybe a topical basis. But it'd be nice to have kind of intro to environmental engineering courses. Here's all the resources, environmental chemistry, environmental microbiology, air quality. Maybe we can try to think about how to do that. Obviously, it's a space issue and a website issue, and AEESP is currently in the process, as you know, Joel, you'll be doing this, of revamping our website and kind of modernizing it, and hopefully be able to host some of this material, or all of the material, really, in a more interactive fashion. So hopefully that will be coming in next year, but this is such an amazing start and the resources are just immense that everyone's putting out there. So it's really great to see.
Thanks. Perfect. All right, another, see raised hand, 2 people. Dan and then Trish.
So just, you know, and so I'm really encouraged by this discussion. I also want to offer a concern, right? So, you know, beware, right? I mean, let's be honest, when you're on the tenure track or when you're going from associate to full professor, what most of us do is we take well-done materials, a good textbook, and we make our own PowerPoint, or we get out a sheet of paper and we make some notes and we add to it some good labs, and we practice satisficing, right? I mean, you know, let's be honest, we satisfice in our teaching as we're doing our research to get promoted. And by satisficing, I mean, we do a good enough job that nobody doesn't get tenure because of poor teaching. You know, but let's be pretty honest, in a research intensive institution, spending huge amounts of time making amazing YouTube videos for your class, it isn't gonna get you tenure.
Okay,
so obviously somebody doesn't agree with my opinion, but that's, you know, but so I offer that not to be discouraging to folks who are super excited about this, right? But to point out, since we are a community that is made up of folks who care an awful lot about the success of our students, you know, for those of us that are a little bit, you know, a little bit more gray hair and a little bit more senior, we can do our best to help coach and to help protect your time and value your contribution. But I just, you know, this is only in Dan's words. I'm not speaking for the whole association, but, you know, beware if you're at a research intensive institution and you're looking on a tenure track. I'm not sure lots of YouTube videos, because you've done a great job teaching, is going to get you there. So I just, you know, want to make sure that we're not overselling. So.
okay. Thanks, Dan. Trish?
I was about to say the same thing. One of the questions that you sent, Joel, was how do you streamline the transition to online learning, especially for tenure track faculty who have children at home? And I have friends who have children at home and who are just really struggling. So this is what I think. It just has to be good enough, right? And I think it's really important that if you have somebody that you're friends with who's teaching the same class, actually, when I was flipping geology, I did it with a friend. And we divided up the topics, and she took care of half of them and I took care of half of them. And we kind of did it in either by expertise or in a just-in-time way. Like, okay, you're doing Monday's class and I'll do Wednesday's class. And I also suggest that you use as many online resources as they're already out there. Just, you can't take a whole lot of time to find them. And it just has to be good enough for right now, right? Especially if you are just splitting apart. We can only juggle so many things.
Yeah. It is an important balancing act. Belinda, I'm sorry.
Oh, I was just going to say, I think one of the things I appreciate about our community right now, and we're seeing it on the COVID wastewater testing as well in this discussion, is our willingness to share with each other. So it makes me so happy that Colleen has used my videos. I think if anybody wants to see the PDFs that went with those, I don't post those, but I'm happy to share those through email with people. I think that we all should feel free to at least, I'll speak for myself, you can reach out. And I've done that from others, and I have always appreciated their willingness to share.
That's great. I mean, that's the whole point of this sense of community, was to try to provide the resources and information for everyone in our membership to continue that high education that we want to produce and deliver, but at the same time, a balancing act in terms of how much time do you spend to create that material. And as much as everyone is willing to share, I appreciate you all for doing that, because it will help the broad range of faculty that are doing these kind of work and are trying to figure out balancing act. And this is professional as well as home. You all don't have just one life. Well, that came out wrong. We do have life, but we got to figure out a way how to balance that all together. So that's probably what I really meant to say. Okay. Let me ask a hard question here. Well, maybe it's not so hard of a question. So reducing cheating and trying to figure out exam proctoring, because you know, kids find a way. So anybody have some great strategies on trying to make sure that everybody's on the up and up and we're really testing their abilities and things like that? What's some suggestions that you all have?
Yep, go Belinda, go.
I was going to say on Blackboard, I had a grader enter in all of the questions from like 10 years of exams, and then Blackboard generated a random exam for each student. That said, I still think that the short answer thought questions are the ones that you see where people have learned. And unfortunately, that takes grading time for a large class. So I definitely had a mixture, but I think that those critical thinking questions, you have to be committed to grade those. Sorry to say.
So I was going to say one of the things that I found useful was to use some rubric grading and some reflective exercises, and to build those rubrics so that students could also grade each other. So I do a lot of collaborative work with nursing. Nursing does a lot of online instruction. There are 4 million nurses in the United States. There's only 1 million total engineers. So when you go to borrow educational materials from the field of nursing and adapt them over just to the field of environmental engineering, you're taking from a big resource pool and then looking to tailor them. Their demographic is much more similar to ours. 95% of nurses are females. So they've already got those issues of being caregivers and balancing act and those kinds of things. So I've borrowed heavily from best practices developed in the field of nursing and brought those over to my classes. So I'm happy to share further details with folks, but being very clear with rubrics, letting folks grade and give feedback on each other. I think Belinda's point is, yeah, you want them to do in-depth thinking and reflect that. But now if you suddenly start have to read, 50, 10-page papers, it's impossible. So how do you build in students looking at each other's in a way that is, FERPA compliant and all of those kinds of things? So.
All right, thanks. Trish?
Actually, I just wanted to ask you, Dan, how do you build into a rubric students evaluating each other? Or how do you set up those surveys where students evaluate each other? It doesn't require a lot of effort and does protect their privacy. And if this is something offline, I'll talk to you offline, but I would really like, that was one of the comments I had this past term was, it was great to be in a breakout room with students who work hard, but it really wasn't great when only one of you was working, and you should add in an evaluation component of how the team functioned. And one thing about that, I just don't know how you would actually manage that and do it.
So the quick thumbnail, and we can certainly chat offline, but imagine nursing is taught a lot of instruction in clinical. That you're seeing patients in a group and evaluating patients and working with patients together in a group. So they must learn from each other's mistakes and interaction. So debriefing is a common practice at the end of a day for, you spend 12 hours in a clinical and you debrief with the instructor. So the entire profession of nursing for educating students is organized around the critique. And so, yeah, I can certainly share some offline, but that's quickly the easy way to give you the answer.
Okay. I guess everybody doesn't struggle too much about fair assessment, that it's working and everybody has some great ideas to do that. So Trish, did you have something? I'm sorry.
Yeah, I just wanted to say, I didn't record them. Like I did not make them use a webcam while they were taking their exams. And I just eliminated the issue with cheating by making things open book and open note. And I told them they couldn't go out to the internet. They could only use their resources. And I actually, it's really easy, at least in my class, to catch people copying off the internet because they use terms that, they have no idea what they mean. So when I would catch somebody, then I would just do my academic integrity thing and give them a 0. But I really only, there were very few people who cheated, but the answers were in the course book. You know, it's, so anyway,
All right.
I just.
Hand by Jim Helsing. Jim?
I just, for the chatter, the speakers, is anybody stuck with a 3-hour class that can't be changed because of scheduling, and how they would handle a 3-hour virtual class to make it interesting?
Wow.
So we do a lot of 3-hour, once a week evening classes at KU. And even when those are in person, those are tough. So just anytime I have to do a 3-hour course, I think the key is to require them to do work in the middle of the week, because if a student only thinks about a class once a week, then they're not going to absorb the material and internalize it. So I guess I would do a lot of, you need to solve the problem and turn in your homework in the middle of the week, and we'll discuss it offline, and then use the class time for more active exchange. So that's all I've got for you, Jim. Those are tough.
My class in the spring went for 3 hours on some days, especially when the students had to do presentations. And I see comments on whether the students turn the videos on or not. And very early on, they told me they all did not want to turn them on. And I was like, that's fine. I wanted them all to be online and present to everyone as we were doing it. And then I found out that they actually worked with each other, recorded each other, and implanted it, and put the audio in the presentation. So they were really afraid to present in person. So they were present, but they wanted me to press play for it because they'd recorded and obviously read it. So I do think they took that professional development part quite seriously. It was really nice to see some of them come, you know, some wore ties to the presentations and so on. So in terms of having people engage for 3 hours, I think that was one time when people stayed online, was when, you know, they had to present material to everyone. I was exhausted though.
I can imagine. Oh, wow, thank you. Trish?
Jim, I've taught a lot of 3-hour classes in person, and they're killers. And one of my strategies has really been to try to limit lecture and to include discussion groups. And I think now, this was years ago, I think now that I would try and do more of a flip type of thing where I might record part of the lecture offline and post it before they come to class, and then spend a good part of class doing some kind of related activity or breakout rooms or something.
Okay.
Things are killers.
Fantastic. All right. Well, I mean, it's a challenge no matter what it is. 3 hours, even if it was live face-to-face, even before COVID-19, is a challenge regardless. So, so I want to get one more burning question that's out there because our time has run its course, and this has been great, and I know it could have gone for another 2 or 3 hours. But let's see if there is one more burning question from our audience that wants to ask our esteemed panelists while we have them. Anybody? Go ahead and speak up if you'd like. You don't have to do the raised hand since we're close to the end. Okay. I guess we've been doing pretty well with us answering some of these questions, and I can see the chatter. There was a lot of things that were going back and forth. I appreciate many of you in contributing some of the responses that went out. We are also going to save the chat. So all of this has been recorded for your colleagues who were not able to attend for whatever busy schedules and things like that. So again, this is a first of many kinds of things we're going to be doing in terms of supporting our community. We will be looking for ideas. We'll be working with our education committee to develop the content and then deliver it to you all at a time in the future to be very supportive. Let's thank our panelists, Maya, Trish, Belinda, Dan. Thank you so much for coming out and helping and sharing your thoughts on some of these very important topics for educating in a virtual world. I also want to thank my co-moderator, Colleen. I appreciate you for helping out and leading this effort, and we will continue to help support you all.
Hey, Joel, can you conclude with one of those like TikTok videos? Are you able to do the dance thing? I would really like to see your moves, man.
The problem is I got a bum leg now. And
Oh, okay.
Unfortunately,
Otherwise, he would be right on it.
you will not be able to, you will suffer through it. But I will video record one for those viewing pleasure audience that just wants to have, how do you call that? What was that show in the old days? Laugh off, laugh something. I'm not old enough to remember. Carl?
So we're expecting that at your address in September, October, when the virtual WEFTech address for AEESP, we'll expect that TikTok move.
Okay, I guess I'll get ready for that one then. So.
Also want to thank Joel for all his work getting, the panelists together and introducing, organizing the webinar as well. So really been a leader behind this. Thank you.
Yeah, well, I am very grateful for this AESP. I want to see it continue to be a supportive group. And I know there's lots of volunteers who put in hours behind this, and I'm so grateful for you all for doing that. So again, you all have a great day. We will have this recording set up somewhere, and as well as the chat, and we will send it all and set it up for others to view. Take care. Be well.
Colleen,
Mm-hmm.
those